Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here with my good friend, Peter Scalzo, our host, and we're going to have another conversation today. And today's topic is going to be forgiveness, because it's just such an important part of our journeys for peace. And
also it piggybacks on the going back
to going forward.
To go
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. Is that we had done the last two podcasts were going back to go forward, and we really talked a lot about the need not to get stuck in your past, but to go back and to reconcile a bit of your past, understand the things that drive you so that you can walk forward in a place of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also said, hey, it's not navel gazing. We're not asking to do that. It's really more about processing and working through those difficult things so that you're not actually influenced by them in your day-to-day life in a negative way. There's positive and negative influences, but it's really to work through those negative influences and learn how to release those to God, your higher power, and to walk in truth and understanding.
Yeah, and I just had a preliminary word here, Sean, just kind of an overall word. I was noticing, I went through the episodes of the podcast and noticed all the titles and everything, and it just dawned on me that if somebody was looking at the podcast episodes for the first time, the labels look great, but it's pretty kind of unique for a cancer podcast to have all these different topics that we do. And so one of the things that I was just talking about with you before we started this was this purpose and meaning behind the podcast, which for me is this marriage of inner recovery, recovery type, inner journey concepts, and marrying that to the actual cancer journey. And I think that's pretty unique, this dependence on a higher power, and then what do we do with that? And I think that's unique. So if you're interested, if you're listening for the first time and you're interested in that kind of a journey, then you're in the right place. And Sean is a recovery expert. He wouldn't say that, but I'm going to say he's an inner journey guru. He wouldn't say that, but I am.
You can't say guru. It's guru if you're going to say it.
Okay,
but it's not a guru, but
okay. However you pronounce it, Sean is the what are you, the facilitator of this, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
I don't know, titles. Who cares?
Yeah, special titles that we have.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's just a quick blurb.
Cool. Let's dispense the titles and let's get into the meat then.
Okay.
Yeah, with forgiveness, one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it was its importance to peace. And we didn't feel like, producer Jack definitely said, hey, we should go a ways into this a little bit. And we both agree. So here we are. It stuck out to me, how much this affects our ongoing life. And so I want to throw out a conversation I had just this morning with a buddy of mine, and I won't put any names out there, but he described he had gone back to a place where he had spent a few years, and he was spending some time with some friends. And the first night he got there, he and his closest friend there went out to dinner, and they had brought some associates from a church they had all worked at, and they had all kind of gone by the wayside in the sense of each had their own things that had happened. And what he had noticed was there was a lot of blame, resentment, and bitterness. Mm-hmm. And so he listened for a while, and they each had their blame, bitterness, and resentments, and they were still carrying them. And it was influencing the way they were interacting with each other, the people around them. And it really stuck out to me. I was like, wow, he was like, it wasn't a fun conversation. It wasn't a great evening. It was hard. But then he's like, I saw, he was asking himself, hey, what am I carrying in that space? So that's one of the reasons why we want to talk about forgiveness. And then he said the second day he was there, a friend, another close friend of this friend, they had lunch together, and he was a cancer survivor, and he had brain cancer, and he had gone through the cancer, and the conversation they had was about the cancer as a concept we've talked about, is going through the wall. And this person talked about having gone through cancer, that it brought him to the inner journey, to this place of recognizing that he wouldn't have grown his own life if he didn't have this great wall, this great trial that had hit him. and it caused him to reconcile the relationships and the things that were happening in his life. And that stuck out to me because I think that's a bit of what we're talking about with why we want to talk about forgiveness, because without forgiveness, we get stuck, and getting stuck is not a great place to be. And you may have something you want to relate to that already. And so I'll pause for a second. No?
Yeah, no, I mean, in recovery meetings, we introduce ourselves, and we introduce ourselves in a certain way. Unlike AA, where it's I'm an alcoholic, our identity is the struggle. We say, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. My identity is in him, but I struggle with. And resentment is usually one of the things that I mention.
I'm going to say that for recovery,
Yeah.
resentment is one of the biggest blocks of recovery. And I'm just thinking back, I've been in the recovery space for 9 years. So you call me a guru. I feel like a novice still. And I think that's the nature of recovery. The longer you spend, the further away you recognize that you are. And I think that's okay. I also think you do learn a lot about concepts and so forth. So I'm not in denial of that. And so when I think about some of the guys that I've done recovery side by side with, I've sponsored people, been involved with, and I'm going to say the biggest block, and I'm having to think about whether it's biggest or not, but it's up there at least. But right now, it feels like the biggest block to recovery is resentment. Is that I see guys who get stuck in, I was hurt by X, this person, it could be an X, but by a person, and that person, I can't forgive them. And they will hold on to that. And usually a good sign of whether that's the case is whether that person continues to talk about that relationship over and over. In other words, they're living and ruminating on this past event, past hurt. And that's a place of being stuck. And you've had your own experiences, and maybe
you want me to relate it quickly now?
Yeah, would you?
Okay, yeah. So I got into recovery 10 years ago, right before Sean. And it was because of a crisis in my marriage, which represented a deep hurt in my life, and probably one of the deepest. And in the recovery process, I was not in a place when I first started it to forgive at all. I had erected over years walls of resentment and bitterness, and could not be vulnerable with my wife at that point, and real. And so what happened was I couldn't get to a place of forgiveness until I had gone through, and we talked about it, I think, last time, but I was thinking about the 12-step process, which is like a beatitude process where Jesus said, poor in spirit. So that starting part of being poor in spirit, and I definitely was that, because I knew that I couldn't fix my spouse, my marriage, or myself. I mean, things were out of control, and I was in a place of deep powerlessness, and I accepted that. And then the next part was, who's my higher power? And I already had a relationship with Jesus Christ, but was I ready and willing to turn my life and will over to him? And I was. I said, okay, yeah, my life is such a mess. Marriage was so important to me, family. And this is a disaster. I had the cancer journey going on at the same time. This was at the heels of my daughter's drug addiction journey. So I could not control what was going on at all. I couldn't even control myself at that point. And so after that, I went into the inventory process. After recognizing and getting peace with God, I went into the inventory process. And that's when and this relates to forgiveness, because it was in that space that I realized my part of it. Yes, I had been hurt, but and I saw the effect and the damage it had done to me and the kid, but I also saw my part. And that was critical, because when I saw my resentment, my anger, my unforgiveness, the way I didn't the ways that I was treating her, when it got down to making an amends, to going to my wife and saying, just to try to forgive her, all I did was I focused on my part. So I was at the point where I was so broken with myself and getting peace with myself and God, that I didn't focus on what had happened and on her. I focused on, I need to come before her and just repent for what I did. So I, it wasn't, I didn't feel safe doing it in a verbal way,
Mm-hmm.
just because I think wouldn't come up with the right words at that time. So I wrote it all down in a letter and handed it to her. And then I read it and I asked for forgiveness and that kind of thing. Now, I have no idea if she processed forgiveness towards me. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's okay.
But what I know is I had a huge, like, burden lifted.
Yeah.
That's all I get. Like a lightness, peace.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable because there was a lot of deep stuff that was going on there. So I'll just end there.
No, that's good. You're describing why it is a pathway to peace in your own life.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. That testimony is beautiful. Yeah, I want to put out a concept, and it's just something I'm thinking about as we're talking about it, since we don't have a set of notes here that we're trying to follow. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
But I'll call it, I'm going to put a name on it, and I'll call it the chief among sinners concept. And that's just off the top of my head, but it's this idea that you hear the Apostle Paul gets to this idea where he describes himself as the chief among sinners. And it's hard to make the case that, he was worse than Hitler, or not Hitler hadn't been born, but he was the worst person in his time.
Mm-hmm.
But he described himself as chief among sinners. And I think it might be an important ingredient to getting to being able to forgive is what you just described. You went in the recovery process to your part.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a great thing to get focused on. And there's this great parable that Jesus tells in the Bible, and he describes someone who was in great debt, that was massively in debt that he couldn't pay. And the person that he was indebted to, came to him and said, "Hey, you need to pay me." And he begged, said, I there's no way I can make this payment. And the person forgave the debt. And then he went out and went to somebody who owed him money, which was so much smaller, and demanded payment. And when payment wasn't given, he had the person thrown in jail. And the parable was given for a reason. It wasn't it was for a way of us looking at how great our debt is to God and to others in our own life. And I think that's why Paul describes himself as the chief among sinners. It's not because he was the greatest sinner of his day. It was because I think he had a perspective of knowing how deep his sinfulness himself was. And so, and Jesus then would say, "Hey, that which you don't forgive on earth will not be forgiven in heaven. You will be forgiven in the same way you have forgiven others." And man, if that doesn't stick out a little bit. So when I hear, and I have heard it in our own recovery circles, I'll say to somebody, it's like, "Hey, you have to forgive that person." And I've had people say, "I will never forgive them." And
Yeah,
I'm like, my heart is like, oh my goodness. It's not, there's both the pain that they're going through, but it's a recognition that they haven't got to the chief among sinners. They haven't got to willingness to accept their part. And I look at your own story, and I know enough about your story. I'm like, hey, for you to focus on your part and not focus on anybody else but your part is such a powerful part of this, is you saying all you can do is clean your side of the street.
Right.
And I think you have to have a chief among sinners. Because I think that's what this parable is talking about, is just recognizing our debt to God is greater than anybody else's debt to us. And if we can't approach it that way by working on relieving anybody else from a debt they have to us, why would we go to God and expect him? Because the end of the parable is when the person didn't forgive the debt of the lesser debt, the person that didn't forgive was thrown into jail. He went back, and it describes exactly that piece that Jesus was saying, to say, if you can't forgive others, you won't be forgiven by God.
Yeah, and it might be like a prison of bitterness. And I mean,
Oh my goodness, yes. We see that.
So you do that to yourself. But it was interesting, Sean, just a couple things. Like the "do not judge lest you be judged yourselves," but that judge word, from what I understand, means to despise, kind of, that's the
Yeah.
contempt for that person. But, don't even look at the speck in your brother's eye. Remove the log in your own eye first. So it is that, like, chief among sinners. I think that for me to recognize the weight and have clarity of my sin was huge, to go and say, because that blame game, like our buddy talked about, what was it, the blame and the all that.
Resentment. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the temptation with going back to look forward, is that, yes, my family of origin, there were hurts there. But if I stay in camp victim, where I just say, hey, I'm a victim of, because I was just a boy or whatever, then I have an excuse not to take part in what I have responsibility for. I can kind of sit back and say, well, I'm just a victim. And I think resentment, like, breeds in that environment of blame, victimization sort of thing. But I think when we take responsibility for our part, yes, things may have been done that were wrong to us, but if we take responsibility for our part, we're able to go. I mean, I'll just take an example quickly. My dad didn't play an active role in my life in the sense of a relationship growing up. And so I was resentful for that. And when I looked at my part, which was rebellion, resentment, disrespect towards my dad, and also as part of going to him and saying that I'm sorry, I also recognized how he grew up. So I had kind of mercy and compassion on him, the way he grew up. And also, just for that, what you were saying about the scripture, I'll just say this because this came into my mind. It's like, you probably remember the scripture better than I do, but Jesus saying, hey, if you have something against your brother and you're at the altar, forget your offering. Go and reconcile with him first, right? And then doesn't Jesus say, if
your brother has something against you,
if your brother has something against you.
Yeah. No, these are all important concepts. And I think the reason why I wanted to highlight is, like, when you're holding on to bitterness, in every case, whatever that wrong that's happened to you is a lesser debt than that you have done against God. That's the point of the parable. And once you recognize that, if you're holding on to forgiveness because you're saying, yes, but that person did wrong, that's the way God's going to look at you. It's like, yes, I'll hold you to that same standard. And so for us to forgive others is to basically open our own heart to forgiveness from God, which is a great place to be, and brings a lot of peace when we release others in that sense. And so that's the reason why we're talking about it. I think an important thing is you described something about your part, and I wanted to touch base on something. At times we don't have a part. We talk about this in recovery. Let's say that you're a victim of sexual abuse, or someone has wronged you in such a way that they robbed you or something like that, and you didn't have a part. And so the point isn't to always go back and say, what's my part? Why did I contribute to that? Did I, certainly somebody who's a victim of rape shouldn't be going back and saying, was I wearing the wrong outfit? Right. The example you would hear. The point is to look at, hey, am I now living in bitterness, anger, and resentment that I need to let go of? Because that can be your part, in a sense, is to allow yourself to live a life of anger and resentment as opposed to freedom from this. And so it's not a part that's necessarily you contributed to the act. No, that was the wrong in some way, but it's a part in saying, yeah, but I don't want to live there. I want to live in a place of freedom. And so that's a piece of this that I wanted to touch base on. And so you're going back and saying, where am I at related to this? Have I been able to forgive? And I had this experience recently. You're aware that we had some years back, we had a large theft here at our ministry, and the person who had stolen the funds and over a period of time had left, and I recognized that I felt anger and Probably bitterness. Yeah, I think both bitterness and anger. And I don't know, a month or two after one of our connections here had lunch with me, and they were trying to work through a restoration process. And my feelings were, well, yeah, the law needs to deal with this person, and there needs to be, there's a lot of those, there's a lot of resentment that was still there. It's been a few years. I'm gonna say just a few months ago, the person called me up and said, "Hey, can we connect over lunch to see and just I want to catch up on this item," and which was kind of out of the blue. And so we had lunch, and he asked about where things were at, and I'm going to put the RT Kindle concept out there because I think it's really to know where you're at in forgiveness is, can you pray, Lord bless them,
Mm.
and mean it,
Mm-hmm.
not just say the words, but and mean it. And it'll tell you a bit about where you're at with your journey with somebody. I liked that. It's an RT Kindle concept that he would put out. I think he called it total forgiveness, is to know whether you're there or not. Are you at a place in your journey that you can pray, Lord bless them, and mean it in your heart? And I think I want to put with that, Lord bless them does not mean, and I really like this part here, it doesn't mean what they did was right.
Mm-hmm.
And forgiveness never means, hey, what you did was okay. It means I'm going to release all that to God and ask for God's best for you, whatever that looks like. And God's best might be just justice, but I don't think forgiveness is, Lord, judge them.
Right.
It is, Lord, bless them
Mm-hmm.
with what's best for them.
Mm-hmm.
And not wish that as a anger, resentful, lightning bearing, fire breathing God necessarily. Whatever's best for them, will you bless them with that?
Yeah, and I think in that case, that context, you may not trust or forget what happened,
Yes.
but you can still forgive.
Yes. And I think what I've noticed about your journey, I'm glad you mentioned earlier with your ex-wife now, is you're at a place now in your journey where you can say, Lord bless her.
Oh, yeah.
And you want the best for her. Whatever that is, you want the best for her.
Yeah, and I think that it was a process, definite process, but I think boundaries was a big thing for me. And just a quick comment about that.
Yeah.
I know in my life, yes, I did a boundary, which meant no contact through like phone or text. Email, yes, because our communications were not good. They were very toxic. And I needed a pretty big wall there so I could process my stuff. But I think that if my intent was to cut her off, I never want to talk to her again, that's different. So that's a wall that says, I'm done with you. We're never going to talk again.
That's good.
My wall was, I just need time to process forgiveness. I need some time by myself. That's how I process this. And like this weekend, we're going to be together with my youngest daughter. I'll be traveling down to North Carolina. So, and that's fine. It's great. I mean, we were there, watched our oldest daughter get married this past year, and it's really going well.
I just want to touch base. I think this is really good. I think, and because the reason why we're speaking this in the cancer context here is a big part of getting to peace is to not live in bitterness and resentment.
Yeah.
And so as you're on a cancer journey, we recognize how much cancer is an attack on your mortality in a sense. And as your mortality is attacked, you recognize how mortal you are and how fleeting life can be. Because cancer does this, and there's that wall that really highlights out so clearly. We're asking you to recognize, hey, where there is, as you went back, where you may be holding on to bitterness and resentment. Yeah. And there are areas where people have hurt you that you didn't have a part, but you may be still holding on to bitterness and resentment, and the process of letting go. And so I want to go back and see if you are able to just a little bit of but what was the process that you had to do? Because forgiveness usually doesn't happen in a moment.
No,
it takes a while. And can you describe a little bit what you saw in your own process?
Like
I liked one thing is I want to put a first piece out there, and I think this is good, is because you already said it. So so not to cut you off, but to actually highlight it is you first took stock of what's your part. Where
Yeah.
are you at now? And did you have a part?
Yeah.
I think is the very first step in the process. Once you've
Mhm.
kind of worked through that and then taken ownership for yourself, for your
Mhm.
actions, for where you're at,
Yeah.
how do you get to the piece where you're able to release that person to God in a forgiveness sense?
Yeah. And just I'll speak for myself, and of course, and on the onset, I'm going to say there's a spectrum of hurt to deep hurt.
Yes.
The deep hurt ones, I think, take more time
Yeah, I think
and
you're right.
more work. I think it's harder. So for me personally, it was getting to that point where I saw the brokenness in my own life and my part. That, of course, what you just said, that first part, and then it was really dropping expectations of like looking at any expectations I had of my ex to like communicate or say something to me that I wanted to hear. Drop it,
Yeah.
drop those expectations, and then it was really that benevolent detachment step that John Eldridge loves to do. It's I give everything and everyone to you every morning. The thought would come in my mind, and it was angry and it was resentful, and I'm a human, so it's like, okay, Lord, I give this to you, and I ask for forgiveness for the resentment that I'm harboring, because resentment and bitterness, they're a cancer that hurts me. It doesn't hurt that person, it hurts me. And I knew that. And I wanted to get rid of that. But thoughts would come back, hurts, because there had been a lot of deep hurts going on. And it was just it's been a process. I mean,
Can I
yeah,
pause you on that for a second? Because
please. Yeah.
I want to parallel your story, not to pause you in the
Yeah.
sense of cut you off, but I talked a few minutes ago about the person who stole from here, and about I don't know, I'm gonna say a year ago, I had interactions with the DA because they were trying to decide what to do, where to go forward, and I had talked with our attorneys, and basically, if this was to go forward, they wanted me to drive it, meaning to put together all the evidence, and rather than they do the work on this, they wanted me to put together all the evidence and move it forward, and they would if I was willing to do that. Meaning they wanted me to basically build the case. And I had to get to the point where, for me personally, the way to let it go for benevolent detachment was to let go of control of this, of the need to be the driver of it. And it was like, hey, no, whatever law enforcement and the authorities want to do, I'm comfortable just putting that in their hands and not being the driver
Wow.
of
Yeah.
Revenge or whatever it is, reprisal, whatever word you want to put on. And so for me, that was my surrender of benevolent detachment. Is I don't have to control the outcome.
Right.
I know what's true. I know what happened. I understand, that it was wrong, what happened, but I don't need to be the one who drives justice per se. There are people that God has put in authority to do that. And whatever they wanted to do, if I could let go of that, it was a way of me laying it into God's hands too.
Yeah.
And at that point, I no longer needed to control, manipulate, and it was like a release.
Yeah.
Of no. And it was so when I talked a year later, I recognized, no, that was the point of detachment. I had detached myself and my need for revenge, for all those things. Because probably if that same thing was done year one or when it first happened, I would have been like, dang right, I'm going to drive this. It's like,
Yeah, because
I will make sure that this gets across the line.
Yeah, yeah.
And now it's like, no, I'm going to release this to God and let him decide what needs to be done. Whatever you guys want to do. And it wasn't saying I won't participate. It was, no, you need to drive this. That shouldn't be driven from my chair.
And, when there's an injustice, like God says, vengeance is mine. Because he knows if we do vengeance, it's not a good thing. It's not healthy for us at all to do that.
Yeah.
And,
so you keep going through your story because I didn't want, I just wanted to parallel. Yeah.
I was
that same
thinking
place
about
detachment.
It brought to me, there's that part in Joseph's story where he brings his brothers in privately, and he even speaks in Hebrew. He doesn't speak the native language, so no one else out of the room understood what he was saying. And he had that great time of reconciliation with them. And I was thinking,
this is the point where he had power over them.
Yes.
As the second in command, they had come into his court. He could have done anything he wanted to them.
Right.
and he's examining them. Yes.
But he does it in this. And so I was thinking, like, some things had happened that were part of the symptoms of our bad marriage. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That a marriage that had, when I say bad, I mean one that was filled with resentment and hard-heartedness and that kind of thing, of which I was a part of. But there were things that happened. And there was a part of me that wanted to shout out from the rooftops what had happened, because I wanted myself to look good, kind of thing.
You weren't the chief among sinners. You were the
Yes.
second sinner.
Yeah.
Second chair sinner.
Yeah. And I remember that I was able to communicate the deep facts, the deep truths with maybe 3 or 4 people. But I made it, like, trusted people like you, Sean. But
Yeah.
I made a very I made a very intentional decision not to share the details of what had happened, like in a public way at all. In fact, even now when I share, it's about that we had a crisis event in our marriage, which is true. But I did that as part of the forgiveness process, because I was showing a respect to myself and to my ex for what had happened. Because it really was a private thing. And for me to shout it from the rooftops would be for me to cause harm to both of us, to get back. Vengeance is mine, kind of thing. And so that was part of the forgiveness process. But sometimes there are still triggers. Like I'll get a trigger and I'll feel the anger. And I know that my anger is triggered when I don't accept where another person's at, where I want to control their response to me. I want to control their life. Like, that's one of the issues of me having anger. I'm trying to control other people. So I'd say to myself, and of course the Lord's part of this discussion internally, but it's, hey, I'm unhealthy, she's unhealthy, we're both broken, and I'm not in charge. I have enough problems just in my own life with me. And so, Lord, she's yours. And we've been through a long process of letting go of this stuff. And even if we never truly reconcile, ever, to me, that's okay. Because it's about, and it's also like I'm able now to do a balanced inventory, to look at the great stuff that we had in our marriage. I mean, we raised 6 kids. We were married 36 years. We had a lot of great times. And, Leslie, wonderful wife and mother in many ways. I mean, unbelievable, hard worker, the whole bit. And so I focus on that too. I focus on the good, and I'm thinking so many times I see people in the cancer situation where they do make an effort to reconcile, like with a child, with a close relative. And I think it's an ideal situation because the person's ill, and cancer is a serious illness, right?
Mortality is on the line.
Yes, serious. And so they're more vulnerable, and, I could pass. So I want to get this thing doesn't feel right inside of me. I want to get some peace in this area. And the other person may say to themselves, they're sick, they've got cancer, I'll go.
It's a catalyst that is
yes,
a
it's
positive
a catalyst. Yeah.
So what I hear is the process there, it was first getting to your part and understanding that you have these feelings and you have a part that you need to, and the part may only be how you've responded in a sense of bitterness, anger, resentment. And then once you reconcile that, if it's this other piece is not for them, it is for you. You're actually recognizing that you're doing this for your own peace.
Right.
And so you're not trying to do this to fix them. You're doing something for their peace. And then there's a piece of letting go of vengeance or revenge. And the letting go process there is describing as letting go, not saying that what happened is right. It's you trust God with it, with his justice, his mercy, his grace, whatever it is that he sees as appropriate, you trust him with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually you get to a place of being able to pray legitimate blessing.
Yeah.
And blessing doesn't mean that you're praying for a particular item. You're praying for God's best for them.
Right.
God's best.
Yep.
And that may look like 1,000 different things.
Right.
You trust God
Right.
with his best for them. And then when those flare up, things that trigger you up, you re-examine yourself.
Exactly.
And you release that to God and trusting God. And so forgiveness is a process of trusting God with the very best for yourself and for them, and letting go of that vengeance. And so,
I had a friend in the cancer space doing end of life. And that friend said to me, Peter, if there's anything I've done to you that you need to forgive me, would you? And I said yes, but it was kind of a half-hearted, what would have been more meaningful to me is, hey, I've examined myself and this is what I've done.
yes.
Now I've sponsored a lot of guys in recovery and they've been at this step. And I've said, let me see what you're going to say first. And if there's any blame in there, I say, no,
Take it out.
Yeah, this is not about the other person.
And if it's just a big blanket,
yeah,
get specific.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. Yeah.
And I think, of all examples that I could personally point to is like Jesus hanging on a cross.
Yeah.
Innocent, completely innocent, totally wronged.
It's how Paul got to chief among sinners. He recognized that Jesus was dying his death. And once we all do that, it should motivate us to forgive lesser sins against us. Even if they don't feel lesser, they're lesser than our sin against God.
And that the feeling of being able to release the burden of resentment and bitterness is a feeling of peace and lightness, and it's just a beautiful sensation.
That's a great place for it to end our podcast today. Is if you want to find peace, go through the journey of forgiveness. And so you've heard a bit of Peter's story and just us talking about this. Our hope is that you engage this and that you see your cancer journey as an open door, as a catalyst to find great peace with those you're closest with and those around you, so that you have peace in your life. So have a great day, and we'll hope to catch you next time. Blessings.
Blessings.